Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in Salesforce FXR. And today topic is 8 ECMAScript standard to learn before building the Lightning Web component. And our speaker is Paul and Nathan. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the Salesforce FXR and the co-organizer of the Farminter in Salesforce Developer Group. Here, I will not take much time and let me hand over to Paul.
Hi, good morning, everybody. And, my name is Paul McCallum. I'll let the slides catch up. I'm an enterprise architect at SenseCorp. I've been doing Salesforce for about the past 6 years, but I've worked in a bunch of different application areas. Been developer in just about every language that can write a hello world. I've written hello world in. I'm working here today with Nathan Schulman. Nathan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I call myself a developer at Accenture. I think the title is longer than that, but it's easier just to say developer. I've been a developer for about 22 years or so, and I worked originally on the Microsoft stack and did a lot of work on the .NET platform. Got into Salesforce in about 2011. And couldn't find a good consultant. I was an IT manager and couldn't find a good consultant. And I thought, maybe I should just do this myself, and learned Apex and Visualforce, and then went on to learn, Aura and LWC. So I've been working with Salesforce for approaching 9 years at this point.
So where most of my work has been shoehorning JavaScript into different platforms. So I'm a fairly senior JavaScript and jQuery developer, and I've published a couple things on that topic. I'm coming from the outside in, trying to push JavaScript, client-side JavaScript, into the Salesforce platform to make it look nice and interact nice, and kind of building single page apps inside of Salesforce. Nathan's background has been Apex and .NET development. So he's really the core internal ideal Salesforce developer in the ecosystem. So what you'll be getting is 2 points of view on JavaScript. Since JavaScript is now both a server side and client side, I'll be comparing some of the client-side features, and Nathan will be talking about the server-side features. And so you'll get both points of view during this presentation. So we'll be publishing the slides, and some of the demos will be out on lwctools.com. And Nathan, you can go ahead and cover the rest of this, please.
Sure. So what I like to say about this presentation is, I think this is what I would have liked to have given myself a year ago as an Apex and Visualforce developer if I were starting to work with LWC, is to really understand that, how important JavaScript is. And what's nice about LWC is that standards make the foundation of it. And I'm going to cover 8 JavaScript concepts. So, what they are, why they would be useful for you. And my goal is that if you have a better understanding of JavaScript and the standards, you can develop LWC better. So I've learned that to create better LWC, you want to know best practices in JavaScript. You want to know the funky calls like map and stuff like that. So learning JavaScript is really important for LWC. And the target audience is someone who's developed on a synchronous platform, like Apex or .NET, and then, maybe you've worked a little bit with LWC and want to learn more about the core of it.
So these are the 8 standards we're going to go over. So if you've used these, or these back to front, our usual Dreamforce joke is, now's the time to leave the room and go to another session. But it's Saturday morning, and there's probably not a whole lot of options. So here's what we're about to go over, and just buckle in and enjoy. Decorators, DispatchEvent, CustomEvents, QuerySelectors, import-export, spread notation, slots, promises, string interpolation, and hopefully we'll have time to get to Shadow DOM. That's a fun extra favorite of mine, but we don't always get time to do it in our presentations, but that's our hidden secret agenda item.
Okay, so you may have seen something like this before. There are a lot of presentations for introductions to LWC, where you'll see how big the stack is for web standards on LWC versus how much framework is on top of Aura. So when you look at Aura, the orange box here is much smaller, and there's lots of framework on top of it. Lightning Web Components is great because it's a lightweight framework, and you know, everybody wonders, why was it introduced 5 years after Aura? Because tons changed with web standards, and the top 3 goals of LWC are performance, standards, and metadata awareness. And this right here on the top is what is added on top of standards, which I think is really awesome, because you get all the speed of, you know, working with browser standards and the speed and the performance that you get out of that, and you have these cross portable skills where, you know, you can hire JavaScript developers to work on the LWC, and you learn a new skill. So, you know, you could maybe work a little bit with React or Vue or Angular. So we'll focus on this during this session, and Paul will give you a brief history of ECMAScript time.
Yeah, we usually fast forward through this slide. Nobody really wants a history lesson on how ECMAScript evolved. But so what we're talking about with ECMAScript is the language specification. The language, the how you use, how if, then, else works, how the object model works. All of those are part of a language a language specification. The implementation, how it works on each individual platform, for example, you know, client-side JavaScript is an implementation of the ECMAScript language standard on the browsers, and browser engines support the JavaScript implementation of ECMAScript. So it's been a little bit of a bumpy road for ECMAScript. There was a long fallout. You can see stuff kind of times with the economy on how often people have time to go back and standardize languages. But this is some of the flow that it's been. And one of the important things to see is that since 2015, it's been much more regularly updated. So JavaScript has gained really wide acceptance as a language standard. Fortunately, especially around client side, but now that things like Node and Lightning Web Components are adopting it in additional implementations, it's gotten a lot more popular. One of the things that we like to really emphasize, Salesforce has joined the consortium of ECMAScript language developers and is actually contributing to the improvement of the standard in the language. So we're really hoping to continue to see it grow, more functions to go into JavaScript, and acceleration of the base language standard.
So if you develop with if you develop with LWC, you should be you know, familiar with some of the standards, and it's important to know that you can use ECMAScript 6, 7, and just bits and pieces of 8 and 9. So, you know, I listed it here, but my suggestion is always look in the LWC developer guide to see if there's something new that you're allowed to use. Like, you know, they introduced spread, I think, and I'm trying to remember which one it came from. It's in another slide, but you know, you have spread, but then there are certain pieces you can't use. You know, like these atomics. So once they're available for use, it's very good to be on top of that.
So yeah, that's what we're talking about with the ECMAScript language specification. Changes can be voted in and new versions can be created. And once they're created, then the platform implementations have a chance to implement them. So the implementations can and will be a couple of iterations behind what the most recently approved version will be. All right, now these standards actually break our rule a little bit. These are actually Lightning Web Component specific decorators. Now, I don't know if decorators actually got approved. They were fairly recently proposed, but I think they were in approval mode. But decorators add platform-specific features to JavaScript code. So these particular ones, now I think it's at track that's actually not even since like Spring 20 update. That's the latest update. So track, usually you put at track around a variable or an object to make sure that its changes on the back end or whenever code changes the tracked property, that it updates the presentation of the property on the client side. So if you want to make sure that every time this variable changed, that it changes the display on the front end, you'd add the at track decorator. And I think the change that happened at Spring is that Spring 20 is that every variable is now tracked. And the only place you'd really use this if you were trying to track a property nested down into inside of an object, and for some reason it wasn't being. It's more of a troubleshooting component at this point. So every variable should be reactive. If it's displayed on the screen, if it changes anywhere, it's going to change on the screen. The at API property makes it to where the JavaScript property is available for call out from other functions. So it's the same thing as putting Aura enabled around Apex code, where you could allow it to be consumed by a JavaScript function that way. Very similar to API. The Lightning compiler adds public handlers for that property. At wire connects to data. So it's kind of tracking data connections or backend data connections and making them track and stay updated whenever the data changes. So those are the three things that you'll want to be aware. They will be Lightning Web Component specific implementations and help your code that is server-side code connect to your client-side code.
So I've put a demo together, and it's one of the most common use cases that I see, which is I'm taking the standard objects in this demo, and I've made 3 containers to put LWC controls related to these objects. So opportunities has its opportunity contact role. So it's a what's it called? A junction object between opportunities and contacts. And so one of the challenges with Salesforce is it's great out of the box when you want lists of things that are simple parent-child relationships. But what I saw frequently is a need to show a table of information of something related through a more complex relationship than just parent and child. So what I built is these 3 components where you have a container, and for lack of a better name, I called it roll up. And then inside of this parent container, you have something where you can click these stateful buttons, which is a nice, handy Lightning-based control that I like. When you click one of these stateful buttons, the event goes to the parent roll-up component, and then the roll-up component has this other child component, ops by role, where it passes some parameters, sets the API, which Paul just talked about, and then you get results based on the parameters passed through the event. So that just gives you an idea. It was a way to show some of the basic, how you can use some of the more common JavaScript standards. So I'll start with DispatchEvent and CustomEvent. This one is really important. It's become more advanced since we made the presentation where you have pub sub, and it sounds like they may even make a new event model, but pub sub allows communication across page, but we're just going to focus on simple events passing from child to parent components. So you need to be aware of DispatchEvent and CustomEvent. So these are web standards, and that's what's so cool about this is that if you wanted to code JavaScript Node, you can use this there too. And what's important to remember is that whatever you name the event, and you can call it pretty much anything, it will be preceded by the word on. So you don't need to write on when you create your event, because then the result is on. And I'll show, you can see it here. The dispatch event right here in you know, we called it foo. Okay, so this is the declaration of the event that's in your JavaScript code. So this is in a child. We called it foo. Pass it some a parameter here, and then when you call dispatch event, it goes to the parent, and then the parent can handle it like this. And I'll go to the demo. Let's see, it's this one, and you can see on the roll filter. Okay, so let's see. I think rollup is the parent object. So this has the onFoo handler. And so what's really cool about this is, you know, if like with type ahead, so I'm using Illuminated Cloud. Most people are using VS Code these days, but I go back and forth, but I do love Illuminated Cloud. But you can see that, let's see, where am I raising the event? I think it's this one. Oh, I thought I knew where it was. Okay, here it is. So what's cool about this is that if I were to change this to custom event, you know, filter, it always has to be lowercase. What's great is in the type ahead, so I've saved it, pushed it. So now this is not valid anymore. And you'll see in the type ahead, you'll see on filter. So the IDEs are really good about handling changes like that. And then you can see in the demo right here, when I click my event, it's raising the event to the parent. The parent is telling the child, and the child is updating the table appropriately. So let's go back to the presentation and go to our next standard.
All right, QuerySelector. So a lot of stuff to be aware of that's going on here is that you're writing code that's running on the server, but is also interacting with the browser, and the server is keeping track of what should be on the browser and sending small updates to the browser to let it know when to change. So it's important to know that you're keeping track of this on the server side, but there are interactions going back and forth on the client side as well, and they're separate. So that was kind of that's the big challenge for a client side JavaScript developer, is usually you're writing code on one side or the other, not writing one piece of code that covers both. Getting to QuerySelector. QuerySelector is one of my favorites to learn. This maps pretty closely to the JavaScript document.getElementById, which is how you tell a JavaScript component on the client side to go find a particular element inside the DOM. The DOM is the object model that all of the HTML elements that are displaying on the page get assigned, and if you give it an ID, that means that code can go find it. Now, document.getElementById operates on the entire DOM. There's no restriction on what and where it can go out and talk to on the entire HTML page. So LWC, one of the things that it's implementing is kind of a container security model, so that components can only talk to components that they're supposed to talk to. And so you end up enabling components and letting them talk and configure as you bring them onto the page. So the JavaScript function that is supported across all browsers of document.getElementById is a little invasive. So Lightning Web Components uses QuerySelector. So QuerySelector does basically the same thing. You use the backend internal ID of QuerySelector and to be able to figure out which component you're going to talk to, and it'll only be a component that you've named within your code. You won't be able to address any components on the page, because as Lightning components are rendered in HTML, and you can see with our demo here where on the backend code it's called ops by role, but as the Lightning Web Components compiler has rendered it to the browser, it's added the -102 to it. Now that might be the same the next time you run your code or the next person who sees it. So where you could do a document.getElementById ops by role -102 and address it with JavaScript, but it might change. And hopefully they'll change it enough that it keeps people from trying to use document.getElementById to do that. Now that's one of the things we used to use jQuery for a lot, is this being able to select components by their name or by class or by properties. But this is one of the things you need to transition over to from client side and start using the backend labels and this QuerySelector function.
So here's what it looks like in code. Let's just say we have something really simple like a greeting where you're setting the property local greeting. It shows up in the template, and you want to change the property through the code. So you can find that component by saying, QuerySelector, find the item c-greeting. Then you can change the API here, and then you'll see that the output. So you'll see that the output is, the greeting for your preferred locale is howdy y'all. So it's very, this is just simple so you can see, how the QuerySelector looks. Don't forget to append this to your properties, or you won't get anything. So that can drive you crazy if you forget to do your this dot. But this is a real simple QuerySelector case. You can also query by class, and you can do query all and pull an array of multiple elements.
All right, so import and export, fairly similar, or at least analogous to the JavaScript source command if you've written JavaScript on native HTML. But this will start pulling in functions and objects from the Lightning Web Components code library in the back end, and also let your functions be accessible by other functions that you're coding. And Nathan, I know you've done a lot more with this since we first wrote this. Do you have anything extra to add?
Yeah, one thing I want to add is that if I'll show you my utility library. So you see this JS util. What's really important is if you make a utility library, flatten is something that I need a lot. Where when the reason I thought this was good to learn is because if you're working with a data table and you're pulling in something like accounts and contacts, the data table doesn't natively work with nested JavaScript objects. So you have to flatten them with a dot notation. And this is the flattened code that I use all the time. So this is a good example of something to have in a utility library. But my one note that I want to add is that this meta.xml file, if you leave that out, then you cannot access your utilities. So this is just so you can see, this is all you need. You don't need an HTML file. And it's one of the nice things about LWC because it's a little bit more challenging with Aura to do something like that.
Great. Yep. So spread notation.
Yes.
So yeah, Nathan was talking about using that there. This is one of the interesting functions that has more of a specific Salesforce utility. So spread notation, if you're looking at the code, it's those three little dots in front of any array. And that means to specifically export the data within the array as the assignment. So it's instead of passing references, which for Lightning Web Components is passing a reference doesn't always trigger the data to the object's change element. So one reference to another reference, you don't know if it's the same or not. If you use use spread notation, it acts as if you're resetting the entire array. It refreshes the object's kind of dirty flag, and that tells the framework that the data inside of the array has changed. So you end up needing to use this to cover the fact that some reference passing, or when you're assigning arrays to other arrays, that it may not trigger the track event that you're wanting, and therefore it won't show up on the screen. So spread notation is a way to do that.
So I want to add something to this, which is that when spread is really useful for if you're using wire, and you know, when we originally made this presentation, we weren't really going to cover wire, but when you're wiring data and you're pulling it in, you get this big data object, and you can't access it directly. So I can promise you, when you work with LWC, you're going to want to add properties, maybe a formatted currency or something like that, and you're going to want to add it directly to the data that comes back from the wire. You're going to get a proxy error. So what you have to do is use something like, I mean, spread notation is just pretty. I mean, you can slice, you can do it other different ways, but this is the most accepted way. And you're going to want to copy the data that comes back from the wire call, and you're going to want to add properties or modify it or something like that. So, you know, it's a really common pattern to pull the data down from the wire, copy it into a tracked array, and you need to make sure the tracked array updates. So I have a demo for this, and it's very short, but one thing you're going to see here is, so take a look at this plus sign at the bottom of my data table. When I click it, nothing happens, okay? That's by design. But what you can see in my console over here is that every time I'm clicking it, a new row is being added to my track data array. So at this point, I have an array of length 10, and I can't see anything. So if you look in the code, you'll see that the problem is, I believe it's this guy. Okay, so what you see is I'm just pushing data onto a new row on a tracked array. And what I need to do is, you know, these are some different options. This is the slice, but, you know, let's look at the spread. Copy it back using the spread notation, and then add the new row onto the tracked array. And then what you'll see is, eventually, okay, there you go. So now when I click add, there's the new opportunity that I've been adding. So it's recreating the array every time, losing the reference, and then it knows to update the DOM. Okay, so slots, this is just a really simple slide, but it's something, I don't know why it was a little bit confusing to me at first, but I think I get it now, and I'm going to explain it because slots can be really useful. Slots are a way to pass HTML from a child component to a parent component. So this example here, we just have one simple example. You can actually do this without a slot name, but this allows for multiple slots where you can pass HTML up to the parent. You can do something really simple like have template, slot, and close slot, and then whatever HTML you put inside of the tag when you use the component will get pushed up into the parent. So it's something you can do. You know, maybe you make let's say you make a tile that goes in a page, and you want the tile to have the same frame with the title, but then inside of it you may have a different component, or you may have different HTML or something like that. That's a good example. It's a use case that I've seen where it would actually be useful. But this is just really simple. I'm passing in a value. This when I put this on the page, I pass in a value to here, and then this is an example of passing in HTML to here, so you can see how it's bold here. A very simple example, but a standard to be aware of. And then this is the one where, you know, it's second nature for Paul because he thinks asynchronously. And for me, you know, getting into the asynchronous mindset of JavaScript was a bit more challenging at first. So I'll let Paul cover this one.
Yeah, so, and a lot of Apex developers may have gotten some of this mindset with using @future methods for for Apex. So you've gotten to where you send a request out and you can't do anything until the request comes back. Or maybe you send requests out, you do a bunch of things, and then you let the return do some other events. So that's where promises and async await start to come in. You'll want to use those a lot, and make sure that you're being aware that dependencies and timing issues, race conditions can happen when you're doing asynchronous calls. You may get the result back from one array, or you may be sending or from one request before the other. So you have to know how to queue things up and make things dependent, but also you don't want to leave page rendering or any other stuff waiting on data details when you can render the entire screen and then wait for data to come back and populate the data second. So the quicker, from a user experience perspective, the quicker you can render the page, the happier the user is and the less likely they are to click away, and give them some feedback that, yeah, you clicked something, hold on while we go out and get the data and pull it back. So there we go.
So
Nathan
here's
has some examples there.
This will let you see what the code looks like. But what I think is really important is, you know, for me, I hadn't used JavaScript in a while when I started working with Aura and LWC. So for me to see this syntax like .catch and .then it just caught me off guard. And you know, people weren't using semicolons, and so it's just something to be really familiar with. And it's sometimes they can be pretty challenging, but what's really important is that this resolve call is like a function callback. And when you call this resolve, so in this example, Paul is going to make a promise to you. You're going to have fun learning. He's going to wait 2 seconds to tell you. And you know, when I call Paul's promise, then means this has completed and the resolve has come back to me. So if an error comes back, it's handled in the catch. If the resolve is called, it comes back in the .then. And so in this case, you'll see, you know, Paul said, there's his result. You will have fun learning. So it's important to be familiar with promises. You'll have to work with promises right off the bat. When you have to pull in, you'll see something like this, which is promise.all. So this is something that LWC actually uses natively to pull in style sheets and you know, so CSS and scripts. So this is an example of a promise.all, so you can understand what's going on here. You know, I have a promise, you know, Paul's promise, you'll have fun learning. Mine is you will learn something. And then when promise.all completes, you get an array that comes back with the 2 results. And this does not process until the 2 results come back. You also get them in order in the array, regardless of the time that they come back. So if Paul's promise comes back 10 seconds before mine, you're still going to see mine first, then Paul's, once they're both complete. So you will see this promise.all in style sheets. That's what's going on. And there's a newer syntax, and it's async await. So you may see this, but it's like a nicer way to make promises. And if you have a function that's asynchronous, you can make a call like this: let result equals await promise. So this is actually something that I've had to use. You know, I needed to manually generate URLs in LWC. And when you use the navigation mixin that Salesforce provides you, it's asynchronous. So you can't actually get the URL back. So I wrapped it in an async call, waited for the URL to come back, then I can get the URLs and pass them to the data table. So in this example, you know, this is just resolving, this is just a simple promise resolution and wrapped in the async await syntax.
All right, string interpolation. This is a fun one that's a lot of other languages have had implementations of this, but JavaScript was apparently a little late to the party in ECMAScript 6. So it really lets you, you can see it has to do with the implementation of the backtick string build. So if you were building a string and instead of trying to assemble a string from a bunch of plus equals or quoted string plus variable plus quoted string plus variable, semicolons, that kind of syntax can get really obnoxious, and you can, if you're trying to build external queries, or SOQL queries, if you've missed a space, that could be really frustrating as you're trying to assemble string literals. So string interpolation lets you build the string and pull in variables into their spot, as opposed to variables being the primary and trying to concatenate bits of string together. So you can see here we've got variables first band and second band set up. Nathan's going to talk about the difference between let and const in a second, but they're both pulled into console.log, and then to enable string interpolation, you put the string that you're going to be altering with variable insertion in backticks instead of single ticks. So that's the important part as you're trying to use that. Otherwise, you will be putting a regular string literal, and the variables won't be substituted in.
Yeah, so let and const is something to be aware of, that, and one of the reasons, and this slide may look basic, but what I still see a lot of developers using concatenation to build long strings, and I still see a lot of var, and var is an older way to declare a variable in JavaScript, and let and const are nice for two reasons. One, let is scoped to the block. So you can actually declare a var inside of a block, and it will get hoisted to the top of the page. And so to really have more control, I like to use let to have more control over the scope of where my variable is declared. For const, this is interesting because, if you've used const in other languages, you're probably think of it as fixed and set, and that's it. But const, actually think of it more as something where you can't change the reference. So once you declare a const, you can actually you can actually manipulate certain consts. So if you make an array a const, you can modify what's in the array. So don't be surprised if you see a const in some code and it's an array, and then people are adding on to it or changing it, but you can't change the reference. So you couldn't do something like copy onto an array declared as a const. So these are just two useful things to know of that we're throwing in as we explain the template or string interpolation. Okay, so this is Paul's cool slide.
Works better in live video, probably doesn't look so great in Zoom. We have a minute left. So anyway, Shadow DOM is something that should be really important to classic JavaScript developers or front-end JavaScript developers. It's been around for a while, but it gives you the ability to set certain JavaScript elements as immutable by styles rendered from the native DOM. So it's the same way if you try to add a style. So when you invoke the audio element or the video element, the HTML5 canvas style elements, they're assembled from basic HTML, but you can't assign styles to them because they want that control to be immutable. They always want the play button to look like the play button, so they don't let browser CSS styles that might be applied from Salesforce or might be applied from your theme, or might accidentally be applied from somebody else's Lightning Web component. It doesn't let those controls listen to or adhere to any CSS values that are passed down to them. So it basically gives you the ability to lock down an element of the DOM and only specifically address it. Now you can with JavaScript, everything's in the browser and you're not actually locked down. There are ways to go through and address it, but it makes it much more difficult, and it's very hard to do it accidentally. So if you're writing code that's operating within a page, it will only react to CSS and element changes that you put in specifically for that element. It won't let somebody's styling of table. So it's really easy to create. You see I've got the bar upside down equals this dot attach shadow. Mode is open. And that will let it be addressed from the outside, but you would still have to call it by its name and specifically try and do that. So once you create a shadow DOM, it becomes difficult. And then with closed, you can make it impossible to where only your backend code that owns that element, that's pushing that element, can push CSS changes to it. So this will be really important when you have more than one or two Lightning Web components on a page, or if you're mixed with people like me who embed JavaScript into Visualforce pages and you have Aura components. And if I put in a style for all of table, every table would get styled. But if you've got your code protected inside of a shadow DOM, it can't be touched, can't be broken, and your interface will look exactly like you want it to.
So I'll wrap this up, but I got to say the most impressive thing about this slide is how Paul made this with the Stranger Things font. So if anybody has a Stranger Things themed party and you need to make invitations, you know who to reach out to. So these are some additional resources. I won't go into them in detail, but these are the places that I've learned a lot about LWC. You have the Salesforce developer blog, the engineering blog. These books about JavaScript, just don't forget to learn as much JavaScript best practices as you can, because it takes a lot of time, and it's really important to be comfortable with JavaScript to make LWC. These Pluralsight play-by-plays are awesome. There's a great one about JavaScript, and then this Learn LWC is on Pluralsight as well. That's a great course. And there's a Trailblazer group, and just make sure you have the LWC recipes on hand, maybe some other sample galleries. They're really great. And then we put our code on LWC tools if you need to look at it, or if you need that flatten function. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's the end of the presentation. Yeah, we've got our... Amit. Thanks a lot. Amit, all yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Nathan and Paul, for a great presentation. So thank you everyone for our participants. You can go ahead if you want to answer that.
Gotcha. Yes. So the question from Naresh was, does JSON.serialize an object won't work for flattening? And Arinka had the right answer. JSON.serialize will only convert the object to a string. Flattening means convert the object, which has nested objects, so that the object has a flat structure with no nested objects. And then the spread notation will actually handle all of the objects underneath structural depth as it reassigns it to a new one. So it's a good way to fully bake an entire array on all of its content from one array to the other, which is slightly different from flattening and serializing. Does that sound right, Nathan?
Yeah, yeah, because serialize, regardless of whether it's flattened or not, serialize will return a string, like you said. Just to reiterate, the reason I bring up the flattening is when you're making let's say you have an Apex call that you're calling from LWC, and you want to get like a list of contacts, but then you're pulling contact.account.name or something like that, so. When you make your SOQL query and you pull it back to the LWC, you're going to get a nested object. So you're going to get you're going to get the results from the SOQL. So let's say contact ID is a property, name is a property, but then instead of the property being called account.name, it's actually called account. And then within that property is a new object, and within that new object is name with the value of the name of the account. So if you're making a data table, data tables can't access a sub object. So I flatten them so that no matter how much you've nested your SOQL statement, it comes back and you actually get a property that is account.name. So that's the only reason I brought up flattening. It's something that I see it happen all the time. So that's why I brought it up, and that's why it's my favorite utility function.
So there's another question that's come up. Can we use other JS frameworks in LWC like React and Angular? No. Actually, well, with React has a, it's only for audio right now. React has a front end and back end component. So you could import the React front end JavaScript libraries. There's not an easy way to demonstrate how to do that really quickly, but Angular is, I believe, still all back end. I might be confusing that. You can pull in, I know you can pull in jQuery, so you can pull in other front end component libraries. It's just the JSX stuff from React may not work the way that you want it to, which is the back end server side component.
And I would add that I would say I don't know, because I have not, my goal is to learn the best, what they call vanilla JavaScript possible. And this is a result of all the standards being pushed down into the JavaScript stack. So a lot of the ideas that were spread across Angular, Vue, and React have been pushed down into the LWC and JavaScript framework and web standards, so that, you know, I've tried to do everything that I can without adding another framework on top of it. But I actually don't know. One of the challenges with LWC is that with the locker service, which is a security model on top of it, it's really hard to pull in third-party components. You know, they have examples of Chart.js and D3, which are really common, that do work nicely with LWC, but you know, sometimes it's hard to pull in something on top of LWC just because of the locker service. So, you know, just make sure you keep that in mind.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't be able to include it from like jQuery.com, whatever, jQuery.org, and pull the package down.
You have to pull it in
publicly
from a resource, and you know, there are a lot of restrictions on pulling in third parties. It's not as easy as if you work on, you know, like a regular stack. And I see, can we insert elements into the DOM dynamically? Haven't tried to do that. I know you definitely can in Aura. I have not.
Well, that's one of the things you're not supposed to do. That's one of the security barriers that they're trying to block. You're not supposed to talk directly to the DOM. It's the same thing with Aura. You're really only supposed to talk to the elements that you control, and that's why QuerySelector, it lets you insert stuff in the DOM dynamically. Because they're wired up, you are dynamically inserting stuff into the DOM, but you're only supposed to address them within the elements within your client-side code. So it takes care of inserting stuff into the DOM. I think you can still do it, but they're going to continue to lock it down. You can probably hack your way around it to do a get element by ID, but I doubt it will work for very long. It did work in Aura when I was playing with it last year, but I think they've since locked that down as well, to where they break helper functions if they have those types of calls in them. But wouldn't be surprised. Document.getElementById probably wouldn't work within your code. You'd have to nest JavaScript and try and load that into the page. But again, it's breaking the pattern that you're trying to run here with LWC. All right, somebody answered the question. See, Nathan answered it. CDN won't. Okay. I didn't. Is that so? What was the def?
So it's if you wanted to. So let's say the latest version of a component of a JavaScript library is always available through a CDN, and you would just access it typically in JavaScript with a script tag or something like that, and you know, make sure I'm answering the right question.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was a Canadian LWC or.
No, so I think, yeah, you know, if you were to pull in a script directly from a CDN, it won't work with LWC because of restrictions. You have to download your JS file, put it in a static library, and then pull it in through your JavaScript code.
Yeah, if you're talking like CDN like Akamai or something like that.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if that was something different besides an Akamai's. Yeah, that would be the same answer as trying to pull an external script. All right, cool. I don't see any other questions. I want to go over our time. Thank you again, Amit.